You need to know what's going on in Mason, Tennessee. Mason, Tennessee is a predominantly black town in West Tennessee. About 60% of the population is black. Almost all of its town leaders are black. This changed in 2016. Up until 2016, almost all the town leaders were white, but town leaders who had been there for many, many years all stepped down, almost all of them stepped down under charges of fraud and corruption. Just recently, the 1,337 property owners in Mason, Tennessee got a letter from the state comptroller, Jason Mumford. He was encouraging these property owners to vote to release their charter. What this would do, basically take away all the power of local leadership and put this town under the control of predominantly white, predominantly Republican Tipton County. Now here's where it gets interesting. Mason, Tennessee is 5 miles away from the site of Ford Motor Company's new blue oval city that's going in. This is a multi-billion-dollar project designed to help Ford pivot to electric vehicles. They're expecting it will generate 27,000 new jobs and $22 million a year annually in state revenue. In other words, money's coming to Tipton County. And by the way, the most direct route from Blue Oval City to Memphis is right through Little Mason, Tennessee.
Okay, so this TikToker story about Mason, Tennessee is something that is incredibly concerning and something that we should all be paying attention to, but it's also part of a larger trend that I think we all need to acknowledge. And that is whenever existing power structures, especially when it comes to business interests, are being threatened, what very often happens is democracy is pulled away to another layer. You can see this across the country where whenever a city, especially if they're in a red state, tries to pass a law, for example, to increase labor protections, increase protections for renters, or increase wages, you see a response from the state government where they try to preempt those laws. They try to make sure that the city is unallowed to improve the conditions for workers and to make sure that something has to be done at the state level. Why do they do that? Because they know at the state level things are just less democratic. It is less connected to the actual working people of that area. But then you also see this when states try to do things that are positive for workers, when states try to put in place restrictions on businesses, restrictions on capital, and especially restrictions on oil or landlords. You see the federal government stepping in to try and pull away those restrictions and make things more difficult for those states to protect workers. But then on top of that, if you see the federal government try to pass a law that is in any way beneficial, you start to see them use the Supreme Court in order to take away those protections. Like, for example, when the Affordable Care Act was passed, Republicans immediately rushed to the Supreme Court, and they rushed to the Supreme Court to try and pick apart different parts of the Affordable Care Act. But there's even another layer to this that people should be aware of. And for this, we have to point to an example in Canada and China. There were two different times when Canada and China both tried to support domestic production of solar panels, to make sure that they had local production of green energy so that their local economy could be strong, so that the green energy economy would have the ability to jumpstart. Even though oil is cheaper, they wanted to make sure that there were local subsidies to ensure that green energy was possible. This is where international trade courts came into play. You see, because of different treaties, because they were giving an unfair competitive advantage to green energy, some of these green energy programs around the world have been shut down by international courts. And this is something that we need to understand, and that is the harsh reality that whenever marginalized people, whenever oppressed people stand up for themselves and stake a claim at any position of government, or even through direct action like labor movement, strikes, and activism, there will be this effort from entrenched powers to strip away whatever democracy exists that allowed that to happen and to push things to a completely different level where they say things are just as democratic, but then just look at what is going on. This is something that is a major, major problem, and it also speaks to something that we need to recognize. The United States fundamentally is a white supremacist society. Fundamentally, at its core, the United States was founded by and for white supremacists. Now, these white supremacists were also capitalists, and so the United States government has many structures in place that allow democracy to be taken away from people of color. And it also has structures and systems in place to protect capitalists from anything workers might do. Like, for example, when they passed antitrust laws 100 years ago, and then labor unions started organizing against giant companies that were exploiting them, the Supreme Court literally allowed the federal government and state governments to try to use antitrust laws against the labor unions to protect the giant corporations. This is a problem that is not just local to one area or another. This is a problem of the way that the United States was structured to ensure that entrenched powers of capital are able to subvert democracy through procedural hijinks like this to strip away people's ability to improve their own material condition. And this is the thing, it's not like these city council members are like radical socialists or anything like that. They just wanted to improve their city. And they also just happen to be black. And that is enough for representatives in Tennessee to question whether or not they can govern their own city. We really need to start to question not only who is in office, but the very structures of those offices and the very powers of those offices. If the United States Constitution was written by white supremacists, how can we trust their judgment in designing the system that we have today? It's not just enough to change who is in positions of leadership. We have to fundamentally change the structures that govern how those elected representatives go about doing their business.